Probably the most symbolic piece of rusted-out equipment still in operation in the Canadian military is the Sea King helicopter. Expected to be replaced as far back as 1983, the Sea Kings are now 40 years old and considered well past their equipment life. But the Sea Kings have also become a political football, particularly during the 1993 election, when Jean Chrétien cancelled the order of new EH-101 helicopters with a $500 million cancellation fee. The result? New helicopters were ordered. However, it will be 6 years before the Air Force will have them operational. So the Sea Kings trudge forward.
The Auditor General of Canada, looking at the maritime helicopters, the Sea King helicopters, about 3 years ago said that they're only available 29% of the time. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that if you've got a job tomorrow morning that's going to require one of these Sea King helicopters, you better have 4 of them sitting on the tarmac, because only one of them is going to be able to be available to you to do the job.
The maritime helicopter is an important part of the frigate system and the destroyer system, for that matter, as well, because, well, the frigates have been called the eyes of the fleet for years. Well, the helicopter is the eyes of the frigate. The radars on the frigates and destroyers have a range of about 50 to 100 miles, depending on your condition. The helicopter can go out 200 miles and look out and do surveillance for the frigate.
If you take out the helicopter, you now have got the system's capability much, much reduced. It's much less efficient, much less capable.
Well, if the aircraft are not capable or are breaking down all the time, then you have no capability. So you can't look at capabilities as simply pieces of equipment or just people or good intentions or money. It is rather a system made up of, in this case, pilots, mechanics, aircraft, spare parts, logistics, support, command and control systems, and infrastructure. And if any one of those elements are missing, then to some extent that core capability has fallen by default.
We're looking at, in all the military, a sense of a system of systems. You can't fight in the Army without main battle tanks. If your main battle tanks are not there, you're dead. You can't fight without infantry. If the infantry isn't there, you're dead. So this concept then of the system of systems is the thing that makes it even more complex and more difficult to deal with.
And when a system in a system gets stretched to its limits, it begins to push or pull on all the other systems around it, and eventually something gives. The current stress points seem to be on the soldiers themselves and their collapsing morale.
If you have a maintainer who is a highly trained maintainer whose job it is to try and keep the Sea King in the air, at some stage the degree of just total frustration that that individual experiences, there is a very human instinct to say, oh, for God's sakes, I simply don't want to play anymore.
Next hot meal.
On top of inferior equipment, another strain on soldiers has been their endless operational workload. Soldiers are asked to serve a maximum 6-month mission overseas, 9 months if deployment training and travel are included. They are supposed to be given 12 months of rest and retraining back in Canada. This rarely occurs. Now, some have argued that the forces as a whole are on the brink of burnout.
There are 4,200 sailors, give or take a couple of dozen, in the Canadian Navy in seagoing billets. All 4,200 of them have been over in the Arabian Sea within the last 2 years. Some have for a second time, some even have gone for a third time. The entire Canadian Navy has deployed. That was categorized as the Navy being tired.
They are being called upon to do too many peacekeeping rotations in too short a time. And the impact of this, of course, is very severe upon family lives. If you have a situation in which father or mother, because of course we've got many service women as well, who is away from the family more than he or she is with the family, then that is a family that's in a world of hurt. And we are then, I think, conscious of decisions to leave based upon the idea that they would like to have a normal family life.
The overwork of our soldiers has been going on for at least a decade and was caused by two primary factors. First, in the early 1980s, a huge number of new recruits were hired into the armed forces when, for a brief period, both Prime Ministers Pierre Trudeau and Brian Mulroney indicated that Canada's defense and its NATO commitments would rise sharply. Many soldiers joined the forces hoping for a bright future. However, by the early 1990s, that policy was reversed because of Canada's debt crisis and a belief by the Canadian government that the post-Cold War world would be a less dangerous place. It was a grave mistake, as it turns out. The world is far from a peaceful place, and the demands on the Canadian military huge. Meanwhile, in the 1990s, the military's ranks were cut from over 80,000 people to 57,000, with the forced retirement of many experienced soldiers. Most of the 1980s recruits, now 10 years into their military careers, were offered little chance at promotion. At the same time, they were asked to do more and more perilous peacekeeping missions.
Well, you can imagine that those young people that joined in the 80s were looking forward to an armed forces of 85 to 90,000, and they were looking at opportunities for advancement and careers and postings to Germany and so on and so forth. And they found themselves, and our studies show this, working 80 days a year overtime, which they've done for the last 10 years. And so we find that we now have people at 37, 38, and 39 years of age who joined in those heydays of the 80s, who have not been promoted, who have had a decade of overwork, and they're just hanging in there for the pension and to get out. And we will start to see whether they get out in the year 2004, 2005, and 2006, because this is the first window for their retirement opportunity.
Starting in 2004 and culminating in 2012, the highly skilled soldiers who joined the forces in the late 1980s are closing in on 20 years into the service and are on the verge of retirement, where one only needs 20 years of service to receive a 40% pension. The chances are slim of keeping these vital but frustrated and career-stunted soldiers, as the 2002 Auditor General report explains.
Many key military occupations have shortages, including engineers, vehicle and weapons technicians, doctors, and dentists. It could take as long as 30 years to close the gaps in the military population. Overseas deployments are increasing, while the military workforce is smaller, leaving fewer people at home to do the work.
The loss of these highly skilled technicians and leaders has become the new Achilles heel of the military. The crisis was set in motion with the force reductions of the mid-1990s.
The most important issue is the fact that we lost 500,000 person-years of experience during the 1990s. During that time frame of the force reduction plan, we released over 25,000 people, each of whom had at least 20 years experience. And it's going to take us 15, 20 years and $30 billion of training to replace them.